October 1878. Semi-Annual Conference. The 48th Semi-Annual Conference of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, convened in the Tabernacle, Salt Lake City, October 6, 1878, at 10 a.m. as per previous adjournment. President John Taylor presiding. Present on the stand. Of the 12 Apostles, John Taylor, Wilford Woodruff, Orson Hyde, Orson Pratt, Charles C. Rich, Lorenzo Snow, Franklin D. Richards, George Q. Cannon, Brigham Young, Jr., Joseph F. Smith, Albert Carrington. Counselor to the 12, Daniel H. Wells. Patriarch John Smith. Of the first 7 presidents of the 70s, Joseph Young, Levi W. Hancock, John Van Cott, and Horace S. Eldridge. Of the presidency of the Salt Lake Stake of Zion, Angus M. Cannon, David O. Calder, and Joseph E. Taylor. Of the presidency of the High Priest Quorum of this Stake of Zion, Elias Morris and Edward Snellgrove. Of the presidency of the Bishopric of the Church, Edward Hunter, Leonard W. Hardy, and Robert T. Burton. The weather was beautiful, and the tabernacle was crowded at the opening services, every Stake of Zion throughout the territory being largely represented by presidents, bishops, and others. Conference was called to order by President John Taylor. The choir sang, "I saw a mighty angel fly, to earth he bent his way." Prayer Rail to George Q. Cannon. The choir sang, "Author of truth, eternal word, whose spirit breathes the active flame." Elder Orson Hyde rejoiced in meeting with the saints on this beautiful morning. The people in the country where he was wont to labor had a sufficiency of the products of the earth to make them comfortable and happy. We had been for many years under the lash of the outside world, and he did not look for any relaxation of their influence until Satan was bound, and the saints obtained the victory. He referred to and quoted one of the revelations of St. John, wherein he saw a beautiful woman clothed with glory, with the moon under her feet, upon whose head was a crown of 12 stars, and whose ambition was far superior to anything of a terrestrial character. While those stars continued to occupy that position, the saints would have nothing to fear. In relation to the witnesses of the Book of Mormon, he said most of them had finished their mission and gone behind the veil. Their testimony was good in its time and season, but as the work proceeded, other testimonies became necessary. The servants of God had gone forth and testified before the nations of the earth to the truth of the Book of Mormon, and since then the waster has been sent forth to destroy, and any were his victims, falling a prey to pestilence, famine, and other calamities. He made a few remarks about the manuscript of the Book of Mormon, now in the hands of David Whitmer. He did not regard it as of any vital importance to the interests of the kingdom, but simply as an interesting relic of early history. The principle of love and union among the saints was of far more consequence to us at the present time. He then spoke of the responsibility that rests upon those who hold the priesthood, and who should be willing to use their influence to reprove in kindness wherever sinful practices came within their purview, and wisdom dictated it. He spoke with feelings of gratitude of the rich and bountiful harvest that God had blessed us with this season, and said if the brethren would be prompt in the payment of their honest tithing, the hands of the servants of God would be strengthened, and the blessings of God would distill upon the people like the gentle dew. He then alluded to the calamities and troubles that will soon deluge the earth and reach the kings and rulers and the high ones who are on high, according to the predictions of the prophets, when the only door of deliverance for those who wish to escape will be in Zion. Elder C. C. Rich said the great object of our being gathered together was to secure our salvation, and this can only be obtained by yielding to and carrying out correct principles. We must not dictate the Almighty, but learn by simple and childlike submission. The grand principle of obedience, which will inevitably bring upon us the blessings of God, which He has promised to bestow upon His faithful children. We have no spare time to waste, but should devote our time and means to the building up of the kingdom of God. And if we carried out the counsels of the servants of God, our labors would be devoted in the right direction. God had given us power to do the work that He requires of us, and it is as well for us occasionally to ask ourselves the question whether our labors are acceptable to the Lord or not. One duty required of us was to be baptized for our friends who have died without the privilege of attending to that duty themselves, and this must be done in a temple, several of which we're now building. We must also act upon a principle of union and not clash in our daily labor, but always be willing to act in concert with the counsel of the servants of God. He closed his very practical remarks by bearing his testimony to the truth of the work of God, in which he had been actively engaged for a period of over 46 years. President John Taylor gave a few very timely hints to the ushers to keep good order in the galleries and throughout the vast congregation, instructing them not to permit unnecessary walking about. The choir sang the anthem, "Awake, awake, put on thy strength." Conference adjourned till 2 o'clock. Benediction by Elder D. H. Wells. Afternoon, October 6, 2 p.m. The choir sang, "Though deepening trials throng your way, press on, ye saints of God." Prayer by Elder Wilford Woodruff. The choir sang, "We here approach thy table, Lord, at thy command, through chosen men." Elder George Q. Cannon read a portion of section 58 of the Book of Doctrine and Covenants. He said that anyone who was called to stand before such a vast congregation would naturally feel his own nothingness, and the necessity of reliance upon the inspiration of the Holy Ghost, so that the people might be fed with the bread of life. We had traveled as elders to the various nations of the earth, published the first principles of the gospel of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, and gathered the people together. With these things and labors the elders of Israel had become familiar, also with the laying the foundation of settlements and organizing a system of government, and by having so many labors to perform in the temporal affairs of the people, obtained an experience that perhaps no other body of men was ever called to. Notwithstanding all these various labors, we were now standing on the threshold of our duties and responsibilities. We now need statesmen and those who are capable of directing the people and the affairs of their daily life, so as to make our temporal influence as powerfully felt as our spiritual influence. He then spoke of the dangers that now beset and threaten our small republic, and said our only safeguard was the principle of union. Though we might be numerically weak, we should be actually strong, if we could but become united in all our interests. In the early existence of this church, though so few in number, the influence of mobocracy began to appear, and persecution set for its destruction. Nothing but the union that was among this people preserved us upon the earth, and God permitted us to grow and increase, until he gave us a command to gather out of Babylon, to leave our homes in the east and come to the valleys of the mountains. There was not only spiritual salvation connected with these movements, but temporal salvation also, and we could not accomplish our spiritual salvation without temporal acts and labors. One design of the Almighty in gathering together a great people in these valleys was to establish a government and dominion over which he should preside. Hence the necessity of our being so thoroughly organized that a power and influence would be developed which we had never attained to. He referred with pleasure to the change that was taking place in the minds of the elders in regard to the necessity of a more strict and complete system of union. But though the principle of cooperation or of the united order might be understood by the leading authorities of the church, it would not be easy to get the masses of the people to adopt it until they could be led to comprehend it. He was happy to say that notwithstanding the many mistakes that had occurred in our past efforts, the subject of union in our temporal affairs had been so thoroughly canvassed among the people that they were now both ready and willing to fall in with any practical measures that might be recommended to them by the leaders of the church. He suggested that a committee, or board of trade, composed of the best practical businessmen of the territory, be appointed to superintend and aid the various branches of home industry that may be introduced, so that the benefits arising from home products may be used to enhance the interests of the whole community, rather than the aggrandizement of a few. The servants of God were endeavoring to unite a people that are diverse in their habits and acts. It required great wisdom to accomplish it. Nothing short of the wisdom of God could bring it about. A perfect system of organization was what the 12 apostles were after, and their labors would never cease until that which God had designed to bring about would be accomplished, not only in relation to us as a handful of people, but the whole family of our eternal Father. He had called us to this high and holy calling, and while we owed our time and means in this direction, yet we must not on any consideration be careless and indifferent to the obligations we were under to our own families, every member of which we were in duty bound to support, cherish, and instruct. If we were only willing to receive and embrace these principles of union that were now burning in the breasts of the apostles, God would abundantly bless the saints in everything that pertains to their present and future happiness. He concluded a very powerful discourse by showing the vanities and evil of living for self, and the glory and honor of laboring for the benefit of others and the salvation of mankind. Labors and experience of the elders, the work scarcely begun, the power of union, temporal salvation necessary as well as spiritual, cooperation and the united order, Discourse by Elder George Q. Cannon, delivered at the semi-annual conference on Sunday afternoon, April 6, 1878, reported by George F. Gibbs. The speaker read from the Doctrine and Covenants, New Edition, commencing at the 24th paragraph and ending at the 33rd paragraph of section 58. This is a great people, and if anything would be likely to appall a man and make him feel his own nothingness, it is to stand up before such an audience as is here assembled, to attempt to speak to them and to instruct them. We have, however, something besides our own strength to rely on. If it were not so, I should not be here. The promise of the Lord is that when we assemble together as we have this day, and as we are now assembled, he will give unto us that portion of his word and his counsel as shall be suited to our circumstances, so that every soul shall eat the bread of life and go away satisfied, and rejoice in the privilege he may have had of coming together as we now are. This work in which we are engaged embraces more and more. The older I grow, the more I become acquainted with its magnitude, with the responsibilities that are connected with it, and especially the responsibilities which rest down upon those who are the chosen leaders of the people. We know, as was testified to this morning, that this is the work of God, that God has laid its foundation, that God has chosen the men who are associated with it, and who are in authority connected with the work, to fill the situations which they occupy. We know also that he has restored the authority that was once enjoyed by man, by which men are enabled to act in the midst of people in Christ's stead. And knowing these things, we are encouraged as a people and as individuals to press forward and to help establish that cause which he has revealed to the earth. But there are many things connected with this work, with its advancement, with the binding of the people together, with the carrying out of the designs which God has revealed for the salvation of the children of men, which press upon our attention and cause us to exercise every faculty of our minds and thinking, in pondering upon and in giving shape to measures that shall result in the greatest good to this great people. The principles of the gospel we are all familiar with as a people. We have studied the lesson from the beginning and have become familiar with it in almost all its details. We have traveled, we have preached, we have borne testimony to this work. We have helped to gather the people together, organizing them, before doing so into branches, into conferences, into missions, and then have organized them into companies to travel by sea, to travel by land, to bring them to the gathering places which have been appointed. With these labors, the elders of this church have obtained great familiarity. They have become experts in preaching spiritual salvation, in preaching the first principles of the gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ, in telling the people how they shall be saved from their sins, and what they shall do to obtain the promises of God connected with obedience to this gospel. And we have, in coming to these mountains, obtained considerable knowledge concerning other matters. Probably today a man would not be open to the charge of egotism, of being vain concerning the people, were he to say that, to take the Latter-day Saints, the men of this church, and in no other body of men of the same numbers, will you find men of such experience in preaching, in traveling, as missionaries, as elders, in organizing the people, in handling companies of large bodies of men and women, and laying the foundation of settlements, in building cities, in developing countries, and in organizing systems of government in those countries. I do not know that I am open to the charge of being vain concerning the Latter-day Saints when I make this statement, that in all the earth, among all the inhabitants of the earth, you cannot find so large a body of principal men familiar with spiritual things, familiar with temporal things, familiar with the handling of large bodies of people, and organizing them, and dictating their labors, and planning for their temporal salvation, and for their good government, as you will find in the midst of these mountains, and numbered in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And yet, after making this statement, we stand, as it were, at the very threshold of our work, just at the door of it. We have made a beginning, it is true. We have solved some problems, but there is an immense amount of work to be done by us as a people, and especially by those who act in our midst in the capacity of leaders. The highest qualities of statesmanship are needed and called for, the highest qualities that men and women possess that make them capable of planning for nations, devising schemes and plans that will not only save a town or a small community of people, but that will extend to nations the means of saving them from national peril and from evils that menace the existence of every power that now exists upon the face of the earth. You look abroad today among the inhabitants of the earth and see their condition, see the evils with which they are afflicted, and which threaten the downfall and the overthrow of nations, and we need not go beyond our own land to gain experience in this matter, and to ascertain the danger which besets this republic, the most glorious nation, and the most glorious form of government that exists upon the habitable globe. How many times it is said that this republic cannot stand, that evils are working and undermining the fabric of government, and which threatens its speedy overthrow. You can scarcely talk with a thinking man upon these subjects, a man who takes in, to the extent of his vision, all the evils which threaten our nation, without having him acknowledge that the future, in many respects, looks exceedingly dark, and that it is somewhat doubtful whether the republic can be preserved as it is at present. With all these facts then before us, it is well for us today, assembled as we are in this general conference, to take into some consideration our own condition, the circumstances which surround us, and examine them in the light and intelligence of wisdom, as He has given it to us, and whether we should not take steps to preserve our existence, and not only preserve, but perpetuate it, and to increase our power, and to cause that work with which we are identified to continue to progress and to fulfill its high and glorious destiny. There is one principle which I think in mentioning everyone will see the power of, and that is union. It is a trite saying often repeated that union is strength. Certainly we have proved the truth of this saying through the long or short period, as it may be, of our existence as a people. There is no people today with whom I am acquainted who has proved so satisfactorily as we have throughout our past experience the value of union. It is that which makes us, numerically, a weak people, a strong people. It is that which makes us 150 or 160,000, or perhaps 200,000 people throughout these mountains north and south, a power in the land, and a power certainly which there is more said about than any other power probably in existence. Divide us up, segregate us into denominations, into factions, and what would we amount to? Nothing. Our strength would be dissipated, we would be enfeebled, and nothing particularly would be said about us more than is said about thousands and millions of others from whom we are separated. It is the union of the Latter-day Saints which in the beginning created opposition against us, brought it to the surface, and made it moving when there were but 50 or less members of the church. The very fact that a new principle of union has been brought to light, through which these 50 men and women were united as the heart of one, was sufficient to arouse opposition and create to a certain extent fear. Sectarian influence was brought to bear against us. Our creed is in danger, our sect is in danger, our place is in danger, if this people with this union should gain a foothold among us. Alarm was felt at the ranks of the various sects, and they felt that, although a power insignificant and weak as it were, it should be fought and its existence extirpated, if possible, from the earth. Hence the opposition it met with in the beginning. A few weeks old, like a little trembling, puny infant not able to walk, not able to speak or make itself felt. Yet the very existence of the infant aroused fear, as great fear as that which animated Herod of old, when he issued an edict for all the firstborn male children of Israel to be slain. It created terror in the land, and all because a certain babe of Bethlehem had been born, and he hoped, in issuing this cruel edict, to destroy this man-child, and with him the power which he feared. So it was in the beginning of this work. When it was weak and feeble, it created in the minds of those who watched its birth and its aftergrowth a feeling of fear, and they were determined to destroy it from off the earth if they could. When the church moved to Kirtland and the people began to gather together to go to that place to settle, you will see by reading the history the fear that was produced. And you read the history of the settlement of the people in Jackson County, and you will see the same manifestations, only more violent, until such a spirit was engendered but the mob succeeded in driving the people from that county. You can trace it through all the history of this people to the present time. It has been the union of the Latter-day Saints that, as I have said before, aroused opposition, crystallized it, and made it as effective as it has been against us. Had we been a divided people, had we been quarreling among ourselves, had there been factions among us and jealousies among our leading men, you would not have seen this opposition, neither would you have seen the credit that has been given to us, nor the power that this people have wielded in the earth to the present time. You would not have seen this spectacle, This inspiring spectacle of 12,000 people assembled under one roof to worship God according to the dictates of their own consciences and the revelations of God, and partaking of the Lord's Supper as we are today. You would not have seen these valleys peopled from Idaho in the north to Mexico in the south with settlements of people of one faith, of one belief, worshiping God in the same manner, and calling upon Him unitedly to bestow upon them the same blessings and labor for the same objects. The value, therefore, of union we, as a people, have demonstrated as no other people now living have, and I leave you to your own reflections to imagine what we would be without it. Everyone can think for himself or herself upon this subject, and you can draw his or her own conclusions. But as we are united and have been spiritually, it is not the design of God, as is clearly manifest in His revelations, plainly spoken through His words, and deeply impressed by His Holy Spirit upon every heart belonging to this church, that this alone is not the object of our organization as a people. It was not for spiritual salvation alone that the word of the Lord came to us to gather out of Babylon. It was not for spiritual salvation alone that the elders of this church traversed sea and land for so long a period, gathering the people together at such an expense of time and means. It was not for spiritual salvation alone that we have suffered the attacks and the violence of mobs, that we left our homes in the East, the pleasant places that many left, and crossed these dreary wastes, and planted ourselves in these mountains. There was something more than this embodied in the idea. There was something more than this embodied in the effort. There was temporal salvation also connected with the spiritual salvation that has been extended to us. I use the term temporal salvation because it is better understood probably than any other term I could use. My training has led me to blend the two, it being difficult for me to draw the line of demarcation between the temporal and spiritual. But in many minds there is a distinction. I use the phrase, therefore, that those who are familiar with it will understand my meaning. Temporal salvation is as necessary, according to the faith of the Latter-day Saints, in its time and season as spiritual salvation. Of course, spiritual salvation occupies the first and ought to be foremost within every heart, but we cannot accomplish our spiritual salvation and the destiny of our Father and Creator without also connecting with it temporal salvation, temporal acts, the performance of temporal labor. Hence, as I have said, it should occupy some portion of our thoughts. It should be considered by us, and as I have remarked, we have not come out of our present location for purely spiritual performances, but to lay the foundation of a system that should stand forever, that should be connected with man's existence here upon the earth, both his spiritual and his temporal existence, a work that should affect everything connected with man and his relationship to his fellow men. A great many of our Latter-day Saints have failed, as I have sometimes thought, to grasp this idea, to grasp the idea that the Lord was founding a great nationality. If I may use such a limited phrase as that, it limits the idea to call it a nationality. The Lord is gathering out from every nation, kindred, tongue, and people a community, out of which He intends to form for Himself a kingdom, not an earthly kingdom, but a kingdom over which He will preside in the heavens, a kingdom that should be based upon purely republican principles upon the earth, and therefore not a kingdom in the strictest sense of the word, so far as its earthly location is concerned, but a republic. And for this purpose, as the Latter-day Saints have believed from the beginning, the Lord raised up the founders of our nation and inspired them, George Washington and others, to do the work that they accomplished in laying the foundation of a form of government upon this land, under which that kingdom that He should establish should grow and flourish, and extend itself without interfering in the least degree with the genius of the government. And this is the work in which we are engaged. This is the labor that should occupy our attention, and, as I have said, we should take warning by that which we see around us on every hand, the decay, the disintegration of the various governments and powers, and organize ourselves so that we can preserve ourselves and grow and increase and add to the power we already possess. I believe our people are beginning to take higher views of the organization with which they are connected, and consequently higher views of their own individual responsibility, and the labor that devolves upon each one as an individual. We see more of this spirit manifested. The elders have ever evinced a willingness to go forth at the time of the proper authorities to preach the gospel and perform labors of this character for the public good, but it has been a difficult lesson for us to learn that it was equally binding upon us as servants of God that we should labor in temporal matters with the same devotion trod the spirit of self-abnegation that we did in laboring to preach the gospel. There seemed to be a higher calling in the mind of man associated with spiritual matters. It seemed to be more dignified. It has seemed to be more worthy of men's gratuitous labor than to labor with the hands or brain for the temporal advancement of the work and for the temporal salvation of the people. I believe that you will all have noticed that there is a change taking place in many minds in regard to this, and many men are beginning to take a different view. In fact, they have done for years. Probably some never had any other view, but a great many who have had different views, who have imagined that it was their duty to look at these temporal matters, are beginning to take different views, to take a higher conception of their responsibility in this direction. It is right and proper that we should do so. There is no good reason why a man should imagine that he has fulfilled the requirements more acceptably, more approvedly in preaching this gospel than in laboring, after the people have been gathered home, for their salvation in temporal things. There is a subject that has occupied a great amount of thought, and has been dwelt upon very frequently in our public assemblies for the past few years. I refer to that of the United Order. There have been some attempts, in fact I may say many attempts at organization, with a view to its more complete carrying out. There is another principle connected with this that has been enforced also upon our attention for many years past, namely the system of cooperation in temporal matters. We have felt to a very great extent the importance of this. I believe the spirit of it has rested upon the Latter-day Saints. When you look back a few years, by way of contrasting our condition then with our condition today, you will perceive doubtless there has been a great change effected among us in regard to this matter. There have been considerable thought among the people concerning it. A great many have reasoned upon it for themselves, and have become thoroughly convinced of the importance of the principle. In this a good work has been done, because it is an exceedingly difficult thing to leaven the whole mass of people, like this people who inhabit these valleys, to leaven them with correct ideas and have them understand them. If the first presidency of the Church comprehend a principle, and the 12 comprehend it, but the people fail to comprehend it, you can readily understand how difficult it would be to make that principle practical and operative. The leading men, then, have carried the whole people upon their shoulders, so to speak. If under those circumstances anything has to be done, it is to be done upon their faith and influence alone. But when you can get the thinking men and women throughout our community to understand and realize the importance of the principle, the victory is won. The work, then, is comparatively easy of accomplishment, and this has been a subject of congratulation to me in my feelings, and notwithstanding the many errors, notwithstanding the many failures, notwithstanding the lack of success in many directions, the principle of cooperation, the principle of uniting ourselves together in united order has been reflected upon, has been cogitated and discussed in all the circles of this people and at their firesides, until it may be said an understanding of it permeates the entire mass of the people, as a people, and there is scarcely an argument needed in talking about it now to convince those who are the most stubborn and reluctant in giving adherence to the principle. When you hear any opponent to the principle express himself nowadays, it is in this way: "It is an excellent principle, if we could only carry it out properly." The principle is conceded, the correctness is assented to, it only remains now for us to carry it out properly in order for us to gain the confidence and the support of those who are doubtful upon what to do and how to do it. You leading men, tell us how we can operate, how we can unite together, devise the plan, suggest how it can be carried out successfully, and we are on hand to carry it out. I do not know from your expressions whether I state your feelings correctly or not on this point, but I state that which I believe, that which I am impressed with in connection with my brethren and sisters, whenever I meet them, and whenever the subject or topic comes up for discussion or mention. There is one thing, brethren and sisters, that must strike us all as being right and proper, and that is to throw our efforts in one channel, to make our influence felt as an entire body, and not, as I have remarked, to divide ourselves and scatter our influence so that it will be unfelt. I have endeavored to describe to you the influence we wield because of our union in spiritual matters. The same remark will apply exactly to our union in temporal matters. Let this people be united in temporal matters. Let it be known that we work together for one another's good, that we labor as a people to benefit the whole and not the individual, and that our influence is in this direction. And I tell you that the same influence, the same power that wields now as a spiritual organization will be felt in our temporal affairs, in our financial affairs, in all the affairs, in fact, which attract our attention. One great object we should aim to reach, that we should aim to accomplish, is to make ourselves independent in regard to manufactures. We have had, the last week, considerable conversation with leading men from various parts of this territory concerning this principle of cooperation. Notwithstanding some differences of opinion upon some points, upon this one point that I have endeavored to set before you in my last few sentences, there has been an unanimity of feeling and opinion that is of the imperative necessary of our being united in our business matters, in our financial matters, and work to sustain each other and build each other up. I am persuaded that a great amount of good will result from these interviews and from the measures that will be adopted. I have felt that it will be a most excellent thing for us to have a permanent organization of our best businessmen and the most practical men from all parts of our territory, acting in the capacity of a board of trade, whose duty shall be to look after our manufacturing, mercantile, and other interests, and should there at any time be anything wrong in our systems of doing business, tending in the least to prevent perfect union, that the necessary measures might be devised to remedy these things, and bring about a concert of action upon all hands. Now you have heard it stated frequently that those who are engaged in home manufactures do not receive the patronage that they should do, that our home manufactories were not treated properly, that those engaged in them did not receive the sympathy of businessmen, and that the masses of people were not disposed to patronize them. I think there is at present time but little cause for statements of this kind. In fact, I have not heard of them of late. But if we had such an organization as this, and I understand that President Taylor is thinking seriously of having it a permanent organization, then if there were anything of this character that needed correction, if there was a struggling institution that needed help, by making a requisition of this Board of Trade, it perhaps could receive the support it needed, and be placed upon a firm footing in our midst, and perhaps be able to sustain itself and live. Already the stockholders of ZCMI, as it is called, Zion's Cooperative Mercantile Institution, met, and a report was made by the president and secretary of that institution, which I think was most gratifying to all present upon that occasion. I have been familiar with the institution since its inception. I think I can truly say that at no period since its organization was it ever in so good condition, having so few liabilities to meet as it has today. It is in a sounder, healthier, and more prosperous condition than it has ever been. I allude to this because it is called the parent institution. In Box Elder County, where Brother Snow presides, he took the profits of their mercantile business to start the branches of manufacture that are now in successful running order. Our institution has done much in similar direction. It has carried many a struggling enterprise. It has been the beast of burden for almost every institution and every establishment and railroad almost in the country. It has accomplished an immense amount of good, far more than mere paying of dividends, although it has done this to a surprising extent. Those who invested their means seem to have become the most discouraged. Therefore, in alluding to it in this matter, it is injustice to it, and injustice to those who, especially who have all the time, over and again, kept their shoulders to the institution, sustaining it and bearing it up to the best of their ability. You all know, who have attended conferences the past times, how much President Young was interested in the matter, not so much in the sale of merchandise as in the principle of cooperation, and he and others have stepped forward repeatedly and have sustained it in the midst of the people when otherwise it would have gone down. I allude to this because it comes in the line of my remarks, in the thread of my argument, so to speak. To be successful, we ought, instead of dividing asunder and drawing one from another, to cling closer together. It is of the utmost importance that all our financial matters should be conducted in a way to contribute to the influence of the whole people. It is of the utmost importance that we should take steps to develop in our midst something of a home character. Steps have been already taken, as some of you know, in the establishment of a tannery, and in connection with it a shoe manufactory. I was exceedingly gratified to learn from the report that nearly $100,000 of home manufactured goods, besides a large list of small articles, the value of which was not estimated, have been sold during the last half year by the cooperative institution. I am informed that this was the purchase price. The price at which they were sold would of course amount to still more. This speaks well for home manufactures sold by one institution. It is an easy thing to tear down. Any man, no matter what his knowledge, no matter what his experience, can pull down. A fool could set fire to a building. A few fools could set fire to a city and consume the works of man that had cost hundreds of years to labor. It requires no wisdom for a man to criticize the acts of another man. It is even said that a fool can ask questions that could not be answered by the wisest men. Unwise people can criticize plans and schemes, the creation of wise and experienced heads. That is a comparatively easy matter for parsons to do, but it requires great wisdom to organize. It requires great wisdom to create measures that will bind a people of diverse interests together, of varieties of views, dissimilar habits, and to some extent of training, and to bring them together, and bind them together, and make one people of them. It requires the highest qualities of wisdom, and it is this we are endeavoring to do. Can it be found fault with? Undoubtedly there are many things in our organizations that are defective, but it is our duty, if there be faults, to correct them. If there be wise men among us, then let them come forward. Let us see their wisdom and not retain it to benefit one, but let it be used to benefit the whole. There was not any more obligation upon President Young when he was alive, or upon the prophet Joseph when he lived, than there is upon us individually. That is looking at it in one light. You and I all expect to share, if faithful, the same glory that they will attain to. Every man and every woman in this audience, comprising the whole body of the Latter-day Saints, expect, if found faithful, to share with those who have gone before, the righteous and holy, and become heirs of God, and joint heirs with Jesus Christ. That is, attain to the very highest glory. If this be our aspiration, our hope and anticipation, we should work for that. We should labor for it. In the words of the Revelation I have read in your hearing, he is a slothful servant that waits to be commanded. A man may do, and he should do, many things of his own free will in the exercise of his agency. If there be any wisdom in the breast of any man that has not been brought to light, let it come forth in the light, that we may have the benefit of it in causing to be effected a more perfect organization of this people. For I tell you, we have a perfect organization in view, and nothing short of it will satisfy us. The 12 have all had it in heart, and they are bound by the covenants of the holy priesthood, and by the responsibility which rests upon them, and upon him who is the president of the 12 and of the church. I say we are bound by these covenants and these signs of responsibility, and to labor today, and labor tomorrow, and labor continuously, until eternity shall dawn upon us, for the more perfect organization of this people in their temporal affairs. And as for division, we want it not. Disunion, we want it not. We do not want to see the elders of Israel fall asunder, dividing this people and leading them away from the union that should characterize us. We say that any man that does it is not of God. The man that does it is not inspired by the Spirit of God, and has not the love and prosperity of this work at heart. We are struggling now. The elements are chaotic. In some respects we are endeavoring to gather together. Dealing in merchandise is a small matter, and yet it lies to a certain extent at the foundation of our business. Therefore we talk about it. But merchandising is a small matter compared with the work of organizing the people to get them to manufacture and to furnish labor, that there may be no idle among us, that every boy and every girl, and every man and every woman in this community shall find employment, and that measures may be devised to use their labor and talent and ingenuity for the welfare and prosperity of this people, for the elevation of the whole, not for the elevation of a few individuals, but for the uplifting of the entire community and the whole human race out of ignorance, out of vice, and from vicious habits, and everything degrading. Lift us up until we stand as man and woman could in the divine presence, filled with that divinity which we inherit from our Heavenly Father, and govern and control the elements with which this earth is so abundantly endowed, for our happiness, for the happiness of our posterity, for the happiness of the entire human family as far as they reach, from the north to the south, from the east to west, until we shall comprehend the whole family of God, our Heavenly Father, gradually diffusing the blessings we enjoy in these valleys throughout the entire earth, until the whole earth shall be benefited and blessed by our organization and by our existence upon it. These are some of the responsibilities that devolve upon us as a people. Shall I live for myself? God forbid that I should live to spend my time and exercise the talent I may possess for my personal benefit, or for the benefit of my family alone. Why? It is unworthy of any man or any woman to live for self alone, to pile up our benefits and comforts for our own luxury and aggrandizement. God forbid that we, whom God has chosen, we whom he has called and inspired by his Holy Spirit, and blessed with the everlasting gospel, and upon whom he has placed his holy priesthood, and called us to be saviors of men, I say, God forbid that we should do this, that we should settle down and think entirely of self, and build up self, and let our sphere of usefulness be limited to our own family. Extend not an inch beyond our own household and our own family circle. God did not choose us for any such purpose. He did not reveal himself to us for any such object, but he has chosen us to be his missionaries in the earth, to be the pioneers in laying the foundation of that great work that shall stand forever, that shall swallow up all the works and powers of man, all the organizations of man, shall swallow all up and comprehend them all within itself. He has called us to this high and holy calling, and it should be your aim, and it ought to be my aim, to labor for the general good. To starve ourselves? No. Neglect ourselves? No. Let our families go uncared for? No, this is not necessary. That is the other extreme. I have no right to have a family and neglect them. But on the other hand, I am under obligation to look after them, to treat them properly, and give them every advantage in my power. When I became a father, I took upon myself that responsibility, and it is a serious one. That is, I should educate my children, and train them up in a proper manner, and see that they do not go hungry or naked. But I have another duty, a duty that reaches out beyond the family circle, a duty I owe to my fellow creatures. It is my duty to see my surplus strength and surplus means for their good, to endeavor to make them better for my existence, because I have been born that the earth will be better for it, that men and women will be better because I have lived, and it should be that the world will be better because this church has been organized, that the world will be better for our existence as an organization, and it should be the aim of every man in this church, of every bishop, of every president of stake, and every counselor and officer or whatever name of calling. It should be his aim to labor for the salvation of the people, and the apostles above all. It devolves upon us. It is the covenant, as I have said, of the priesthood we have received, and it rests upon us, and it requires us to labor to combine and unite the interests of this people. And we beseech you, in Christ's stead, brethren and sisters, be united, put away bickerings, put away strifes, put away all those causes of division, whether they are real or imaginary, and be united as a people. And I tell you, in the name of Jesus, as one of his apostles, if you do this, the heavens will be open to you, and the blessings of God will descend upon you. In your basket and in your store, in your fields and in your flocks and herds, in your wives and children, in your husbands, in your fathers and mothers, in your brothers and sisters, and all your organizations, the blessings of God will descend, like the dew distilled from heaven, and rest upon you, and all that bless you will imbibe and cherish the same Spirit. Now these things are pressing upon us. We have everything against us. The whole world, it may be said, are ready to pass judgment upon us. But yet there are many who oppose the work of God, who do so because they have not understood it. And such people, many of them, will be gathered in and numbered among us. This work is not for this little handful of people. It is for the whole earth, and all the inhabitants thereof. And the day will come when the lessons taught by the Latter-day Saints will be approved by those who are not Latter-day Saints, when the good government maintained in the midst of the people of God will be copied after, and will be looked to as exemplary. I pray God to bless you, to pour out his Spirit upon this conference, and upon all who shall speak, and all who shall hear, and all who are kept away from this conference, that the Spirit may run through every heart. For I tell you, my brethren and sisters, it is in vain that we labor, unless God is with us. In vain we assemble, unless his Spirit is poured upon the people to make them to comprehend, and to soften their hearts. It is a need greatly to be desired that God's Spirit will descend upon the Latter-day Saints. Oh, that it might be poured out in power, and break and rend asunder the darkness that beclouds our minds, that we may see the things of God as they really are, and sense fully the responsibilities we are under as individuals before him. and I believe that it will be poured out more and more, and the blessings which we have yearned for, and which we have prayed for, and which we have so much desired in our hearts, and for which we have built temples, these blessings will descend upon us, and the angels will be nearer to us, and the heavens will be more open to our cries and to our supplications to bestow upon us the blessings thereof. We approach nearer to heaven correspondingly as we live the gospel revealed to us. It is a precious gospel. It is a gospel in which there is contained every requisite to make men and women happy, and to produce a heaven upon earth, and if we obey it and carry it out, there will be more blessings conferred upon us. That this may be the case is my prayer. In the name of Jesus, Amen. The choir sang an anthem, The Mercies of the Lord. Conference was adjourned till tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Benediction by Elder Orson Pratt. Second day, Monday morning, October 7, 10 a.m. The conference was called to order by President John Taylor. The choir sang, See How the Morning Sun Pursues His Shining Way. Prayer by Elder Albert Carrington. The choir sang, Mortals awake, with angels join the chants and chant the solemn lay. Elder Orson Pratt read a portion of a revelation given to Joseph Smith the prophet on the 6th day of April, 1830, being the same day the Church of Christ was organized in this dispensation. This revelation contains a message of salvation that was to be carried to all the inhabitants of the earth, and the inevitable consequences that would follow their acceptance or rejection of the same were that whoever believes and receives the testimony of the servants of God in these days will be saved, and whoever rejects their testimony will be damned. He then spoke of the testimony of the witnesses to the truth of the Book of Mormon. 12 men bore witness to what their eyes saw and what their ears heard. The angel of God appeared to 3 of them, and not only presented the plates before them, permitting them to handle them, but told them that God had enabled his servant Joseph Smith to translate from these plates the Book of Mormon, and commanded them to bear this testimony before the world. Out of the 12 witnesses, 11 have gone the way of all flesh, and only 1 was now living, whose name was David Whitmer. He then rehearsed that he and Elder Joseph F. Smith had recently held with David Whitmer, who bore the same testimony which is contained in the Book of Mormon, and which the speaker had heard him bear 48 years ago. The Book of Mormon has been translated into 10 different languages, and the testimony of those 12 witnesses will stand in the day of judgment against all those nations where this work is introduced and they reject it. The message of life and salvation with those witnesses testified to is the same that our elders have carried and proclaimed for the last 40 years among many nations of the earth. He closed his remarks by blessing the congregation in all their temporal and spiritual labors. Elder Joseph F. Smith briefly referred to the recent mission of himself and Elder Orson Pratt to the States. He related some of the terrible effects of the recent cyclone which had just before their visit passed over the country. Some of the fearful consequences of it were seen in the town of Richmond, Missouri, and in the very place where Parley P. Pratt, many years ago, was a prisoner for the gospel's sake. The place of his confinement was utterly swept away. They also visited Independence, Missouri, and examined the very spot which God designated to his servant Joseph Smith many years ago for a temple. The ground which was purchased for this purpose was entirely barren, without a green leaf that he could gather as a souvenir of the visit. They also had an interview with William E. McClellan, one of the first council of the 12 apostles, who apostatized from the church a great many years ago, and who believed in the mission of Joseph up to the time of his own apostasy. He then said the chief object of their mission east was to obtain, if possible, some dates and facts that pertain to the early history of the church, which, for want of more correct records in that early day, were lacking, supposing that some things might be gleaned from the old settlers still living in the neighborhood, but they found no one who would give them any information, or who knew as much as ourselves on these matters. They called upon his cousin, Joseph Smith, and had some conversation with him about what is called the inspired translation of the Bible by the prophet Joseph Smith. The speaker was well satisfied that the book so published is only a partial translation by the prophet, and merely contains the translation of King James, with some changes in the 1st chapter of Genesis and the 24th chapter of Matthew, which had been published by this church in the Pearl of Great Price many years ago. They also had the privilege of visiting the temple in Kirtland and the hill Cumorah, besides preaching the gospel where opportunity offered. The entire account of their visit and experience while East has been written and placed in the possession of President John Taylor. He then gave a faithful warning to the saints to continue in their faith, to build up Zion in every possible way, and said that God in his own time would bring forth those records which are now in the care of the angel. They would come forth to this people and to no other, and not to them until they were fully prepared to receive them. He closed by bearing a faithful testimony, not only to the truth of the work of God, but to the priesthood now held by the present leaders of the Church. President John Taylor spoke of the obligations that rest upon the various quorums of priesthood from the head to the feet, and the necessity there was for all who are placed as shepherds over the flock, to be pure and holy in their minds, and set such examples of righteousness, virtue, and uprightness as would be commendatory to all those over whom they preside, to put down iniquity and always be ready to carry out the designs and purposes of the Almighty, both of a temporal and a spiritual nature. After making some further practical remarks, he blessed the congregation. The choir sang an anthem, Thine, O Lord, is the greatness. Conference was adjourned till 2 o'clock. Benediction by Elder Lorenzo Snow. Monday afternoon, 2 p.m. The choir sang, Sweet is the peace the gospel brings to seeking minds and true. Prayer by Elder Lorenzo Snow. The choir sang Glorious things of thee are spoken, Zion city of our God. Elder George Q. Cannon read the following report of the Trustee and Trust. At the last October Conference, 1877, held in this place, an auditing committee was appointed for the purpose of examining, adjusting, and verifying all accounts of a public nature associated with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. During the administration of my predecessors in office, our late venerable and respected presidents Brigham Young and George A. Smith, and especially through the many years of the former's laborious and efficient administration, I was aware that complications in property matters must necessarily exist, arising from Indian wars, inimical legislation, and many onslaughts that had been made upon him by government officials and our federal courts, as well as many vindictive and bitter assaults from unprincipled private individuals. I was aware also that owing to some of the malignant prosecutions and persecutions, some of which were aimed at our public property, that he had taken measures in the interest of the Church to transfer certain public properties to his own name, to preserve them from the rapacity and spoliation of unprincipled men who sought to rob and despoil us of our property. These things are well known, and he has frequently mentioned them in public. When you elected me trustee and trust, knowing the delicate nature of the position, I desired some assistance to relieve me, in part, from the onerous duties devolving upon me, and therefore nominated an auditing committee composed of Wilford Woodruff, Erastus Snow, and Joseph F. Smith, which nomination received the unanimous vote of the conference. At the last April conference, Franklin D. Richards was added to the committee. This was considered proper in consequence of the multiplied labors of their investigation, and the necessity of the frequent absence of some of them upon other duties. With the same view, I proposed that the 12 apostles and counselors, and the presiding bishop, Edward Hunter, should be counselors to the trustee and trust, that everything might be thoroughly understood and perfect union exist, and also that the bishopric, be represented by its president, might be cognizant of all our acts and temporal affairs. The auditing committee immediately entered upon their labors and pursued with untiring energies the arduous duties which had been assigned them, conferring frequently with me and with the Council of the 12, as well as with the executors of the estate of the late President Young, and also obtaining explanations and aid in their researches from the clerks now in the offices of the trustee and trust, as well as from those who had heretofore occupied those positions. They had not prosecuted their investigations very far before they discovered the facts in relation to the transfer of property before referred to, and, in connection therewith, a large amount of personal liabilities incurred by the late President Young in preserving public interests from attempted spoliation. A question arose in the minds of the committee as to how far they should go back in their investigations. They at first thought that it would be proper only to go as far back as the commencement of the administration of President George A. Smith. But as there was at that time only a partial settlement, and as many of the accounts associated with some of these property matters ran far behind that time, it was adjudged proper, in the interests of the late President Brigham Young and George A. Smith, as well as that of the Church, to go back to the commencement of accounts in these valleys, and thus, by a full, fair, and impartial investigation, preserved undimmed the honor of President Young and his interests, and to do right, deal justly by him, to accord to his heirs what was their due, as well as to protect the interests of the Church, that the memory of the dead might be preserved sacred, the interests of the living protected, and the Church also be placed on a proper footing. The course of procedure has been for the auditing committee, in making their examinations, to submit them to me as trustee in trust. They were then submitted to the executors, together with the necessary explanations and vouchers, and wherein there were any differences of judgment they were submitted to the Council of the 12, whose action has been unanimous, and according to the requirements of the law they were afterwards submitted, as I am informed, to the action of the judge probate. In those settlements the feeling of the auditing committee, as well as my own, has been to meet, as far as practicable, the views and requirements of the executors, whilst they, in turn, were always ready to yield to what was considered reasonable from us, a spirit of unanimity and forbearance prevailing, and from a feeling of affection and regard which we all felt for our venerated and revered President. If there was a doubt on any point, we have felt to give it in favor of the President, and to deal with him dead as generously as we would were he still living in our midst. And we are persuaded that saints of the living God, who have so often in this place and throughout the territory witnessed his untiring energy, his unwavering fidelity, his burning zeal, and his indomitable perseverance in their welfare, in defense of the truth, in the building up of Zion, and the establishment of truth on the earth, would say Amen, and feel, with us, to treat him and his kindly, generously, and magnanimously. It is but proper here to state that in all our investigations neither the auditing committee nor myself have interfered in any wise with the public official acts of either the late Presidents Brigham Young or George A. Smith, as trustees in trust, nor with any of their settlements or disbursements. Our inquiries have been directed to living issues, to unsettled and unadjusted accounts, not only as between President Young's estate and the Church, but also that of many other individuals. It is true that in a few instances we have been called upon to examine accounts wherein it was alleged error or omissions had been made, which by some might be considered irrelevant, having been before adjusted, yet it was thought by us that reasonable men can always afford to be just, to answer any proper inquiries and rectify any mistakes. We have therefore yielded to their solicitations, and I take great pleasure in stating that with very slight exceptions the accounts of the President have been found strictly correct, and vouchers produced authenticating his position in settlements, demonstrating the accuracy of his accounts, supervised and adjusted, of course, by his able clerical aid. It is very gratifying to state that long before his demise our esteemed President made a will, in which ample provisions were made for the adjustment and settlement of all his accounts, whether of a private or public nature, and the executors were fully empowered to adjust said accounts and make such adjustments, as also to make conveyances of all properties held by him in trust, either of a public or private nature, thus evincing that nice sense of honor which is so pleasing to see exhibited by men to whom is committed those sacred trusts. It is proper here to state that the executors, to whom was committed the onerous duties of adjusting and settling those accounts, after using the nicest scrutiny and most rigid criticism, aided by competent experts, have always expressed a readiness to adjust all matters in question fairly and honorably, and none more so than the one named after his deceased father, Brigham Young, Jr. I also take pleasure in saying that your auditing committee, to whom was committed the unpleasant yet onerous duty of examining and adjusting such a variety of accounts, extending through so many years, after a laborious, careful, and exhaustive inquiry, assisted by the most competent clerical aid, have been enabled to bring their labors to a satisfactory conclusion, satisfactory to themselves, to the executors, and to the trustee in trust. I think, could President Young have been present, he would have said it was satisfactory to him. I hope it will also meet your approval. In this settlement we have mutually exchanged receipts. The trustee in trust and the Council of the 12 have given a receipt in full of all the demands to the executors of the estate of the late President Brigham Young, and have in return received from the executors not only the transfer of all properties and claims according to the Church, but an acknowledgment of the correctness of those claims. Thus has President Young not only made provisions in his will for the adjustment of these matters, but provided the means of settlement, which the executors have faithfully carried out. Thus has he not only vindicated his own honor, but in this last act, thrown back in the teeth of his enemies and calumniators the falsity of their accusations. In this connection, in justice to our counselor John W. Young, it may be proper to state that all accounts against him have been fully settled and paid to the satisfaction of the trustee in trust, and he now holds a receipt in full of all demands against him, signed by the trustee in trust. I am also informed by the executors that our settlements have been generally satisfactory to the heirs, and that all, with the exception of 3 or 4 not yet settled with, have signed an acquittance to all property claims against the church. The particulars of the settlement can all be found on record in the proper place as to what property we have, where situated, or how secured. Can be learned by the proper officers and authorities of the church whenever occasion requires. It may be appropriate, however, to say that we have used our best judgment, aided by the most competent legal advice in the adjustment of said property, and the protection of the general propriety rights of the church, and of all persons and interests involved therein, all of which is respectfully submitted. John Taylor, Trustee and Trust of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We agree in the above. Wilfred Woodruff, Orson Hyde, Orson Pratt Sr., Charles C. Rich, Lorenzo Snow, Franklin D. Richards, George Q. Cannon, Brigham Young, Jr., Joseph F. Smith, Albert Carrington, Daniel H. Wells, Edward Hunter, Presiding Bishop. Counselors to the Trustee and Trust. The report was adopted by a unanimous vote. Elder Lorenzo Snow said the Latter-day Saints understand very well that we are dependent on the Spirit of the Lord for any information we may possess, pertaining to the things of His kingdom. We find ourselves here in an infantile state, and have to receive an education until we reach the dignity of the Godhead. We are the offspring of our Heavenly Father, and it is His design to bring us to a fullness of knowledge. The Apostle Paul taught the doctrine that the saints should have the same mind as was in Christ Jesus, who, being in the form of God, thought it was not robbery to be made equal with God. The saints in those days had to pass through much trouble and persecution, and it was necessary to direct their minds towards the glorious future, when they would come in possession of so great and precious a treasure, when our minds are lit up by the Spirit of God, to see by the eye of faith the things that are in store for the faithful. We feel perfectly willing to do anything that we may be called upon to attend to. He then read from the Doctrine and Covenants in regard to the saints being clothed with garments of their own make, and with a view of impressing this subject upon the minds of the saints. He recommended every man and woman, when going to his store, to make inquiry for homemade articles, instead of those of foreign manufacture. The success or failure of every home enterprise that was started in our midst depended upon the action of the body of the people. This line of policy was only the beginning of the United Order, and after so much had been said and talked about, let us now put it into practice, and God would bless us, and our labors would be successful. A list of names of missionaries was read by Elder George Q. Cannon and unanimously sustained by the conference as published in the news of last evening. The following report was then read in relation to the Logan Temple and adopted unanimously by the conference. Donations from June 2, 1877 to September 1, 1877. By Cache Valley, Stake of Zion, $56,284.67. By Bear Lake, $20,274.41. By Box Elder, $13,352.11. New Zealand Conference, $36.96. St. George Stake, $50. Salt Lake Stake, $22.61. Total, $90,020.76. The following exhibit was then read of the Perpetual Emigration Fund Company for the past 6 months, ending October 5, 1878, which was unanimously adopted by the conference. The entire amount of receipts in cash and other sundries, $20,361.63. Deduct the cash on hand April 6, 1878, $1,079.28, leaving the total amount of receipts $19,282.35. Disbursements. Paid to Deseret News, $12.30. Paid for draft number 2222 on the Liverpool office for seafares of the Beveridge family, $58.50. Paid to Trustee and Trust, for which we have received credit on the church books as per T.N.T. orders. $211, $71, $381, $104, $661, $200 for cash, $375. Also in labor, livestock, etc., $16,588.53. Cash loaned to the trustee and trust, $500. Cash balance on hand, nearly all of which is due to the Liverpool and New York offices for persons ordered out by the PE Fund Company this season, and will be forwarded as soon as we received returns from the last company, $2,826.80. Total disbursements, including cash on hand, $20,361.63. Elder Albert Carrington made some very practical remarks, especially in relation to the indebtedness to the PE Fund. President John Taylor said the conference was not yet concluded, as there was some important business to be presented, and he hoped the saints would be patient until it was brought to a close, and by a continuance of their faith and prayers seek to bring down the blessings of God upon them. If they would do this, they should be abundantly rewarded. Conference was adjourned until 10 o'clock tomorrow. The choir sang an anthem, The Eyes of All. Benediction by Elder Wilford Woodruff. Third day, Tuesday, October 8, 10 a.m. The conference was called to order by President John Taylor. The choir sang, My soul is full of peace and love, and I soon shall see Christ from above. Prayer by Elder W. H. Folsom. The choir sang, To Him who made the world, the sun, the moon, and stars. Elder George Q. Cannon then presented the following authorities of the church, all of whom were unanimously sustained by the conference. John Taylor as President of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, as one of the 12 Apostles, and of the Presidency of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. As members of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, Wilford Woodruff, Orson Hyde, Orson Pratt, Charles C. Rich, Lorenzo Snow, Erastus Snow, Franklin D. Richards, George Q. Cannon, Brigham Young, Jr., Joseph F. Smith, and Albert Carrington. Counselors to the 12 Apostles, John W. Young, D. H. Wells. The 12 Apostles as the presiding quorum and authority of the church, and, with their counselors, as prophets, seers, and revelators. Patriarch of the church, John Smith. As the first 7 presidents of the 70s, Joseph Young, Levi W. Hancock, Henry Harriman, Albert P. Rockwood, Horace S. Eldridge, Jacob Gates, and John Van Cott. The presiding bishop of the church, Edward Hunter, with Leonard W. Hardy and Robert T. Burton as his counselors. John Taylor as trustee and trust of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, with the 12 Apostles, and their 2 counselors, and Edward Hunter as his counselors. Albert Carrington is president of the Perpetual Emigrating Fund for Gathering the Poor, and the following as his assistants: F. D. Richards, F. M. Lyman, H. S. Eldridge, Joseph F. Smith, John W. Young, Angus M. Cannon, Moses Thatcher, William Jennings, John R. Winder, Henry Dinwoody, Robert T. Burton, A. O. Smoot, and H. B. Clausen. Orson Pratt as historian and general church recorder, and Wilford Woodruff as his assistant. Truman O. Angel as general architect for the church, and T. O. Angel, Jr. and W. H. Folsom as his assistants. As auditing committee, W. Woodruff, E. Snow, F. D. Richards, J. F. Smith. George Goddard as clerk of the conference. The following report from Morris and Evans was read, in relation to funds collected by them for the benefit of the Welsh saints, and adopted by a unanimous vote. Cash received $4,319.83. Sundries $130.72. Total $4,450.55. Disbursements. Cash sent to the Liverpool office $3,184. Cash sent to W.C. Staines $484. Cash sent to Pennsylvania $190. Cash to incidental expenses $51.75. Balance on hand to be sent to New York to meet the October company $540.80. Total $4,450.55. The following report in relation to the Manti Temple was also read and accepted. The monthly cash donations and sundry articles received from the following states aggregate as follows: San Pete Steak, $49,445.29. Juab Steak, $4,581.47. Sevier Steak, $8,849.62. Millard steak, $6,443.89. Beaver steak, $4,732.49. Parawan steak, $5,482.75. Panguitch steak, $2,515.75. Kanab steak, $1,649.42. St. George steak, $6,267.43. Other places, $146. Total, $90,114.11. Of the above amount, the sum of $3,502.94 was donated in cash. Elder Brigham Young, Jr. gave an interesting recital of his recent experience in visiting the various settlements of the saints, and rejoiced exceedingly at the gradual but certain growth of the principle of union, noticeable in the midst of the people. He also paid a just tribute to the efforts exerted in our Sabbath school institutions, and the good that had been effected by them. He much regretted the practice of many parents in sending their daughters to this city to live out for the sake of wages, and made many seasonable remarks on the subject. He spoke of the necessity the saints were under to become united by observing and carrying out the counsel of the servants of God, that we might thereby be prepared for the providences of the Almighty, the growth of this people, and the ultimate possession of the whole land of North and South America was just as inevitable and certain as the shining of the sun. Elder Franklin D. Richards enlarged very interestingly upon the subject of union, showing its vital importance to us as a people, through all the ramifications of our varied existence. He deprecated the practice of the saints in sending their children to receive an education at the hands of our open enemies, who repudiate openly some of the precious principles of the gospel, and upon this subject he gave a faithful warning to those parents who were thus trifling with the best interests of their children, and unless such parents repented, the displeasure of the Lord would rest upon them. He could certainly foresee that the liberty of those in our midst who were seeking to lead astray our children by offering the inducement of a free education would eventually prove a source of regret and sorrow, unless the Lord in his providence overruled and changed the current of events. Elder W. Woodruff said we, as a people, were fulfilling our destiny and carrying out those principles and prophecies that the ancient prophets foresaw. We had, therefore, a great responsibility resting upon us to erect temples, wherein we might redeem the living and the dead. He gave some good instructions to the presidents of stakes, bishops, and other officials, and urged upon them the necessity of each one of them using all his influence to sustain every cooperative institution, as a preparatory step towards the establishment of the united order, which would have to be entered into by us as a people. We would have to be united in all our temporal labors to promote the principle of union for the benefit of the whole people. We were here to build up Zion, to establish righteousness, and prepare ourselves and our children for the coming of the Son of Man in the clouds of heaven. The gospel which we had received was everlasting in its nature. There was no change. It was always the same in every dispensation. Faith, repentance, and baptism were eternal principles. He said that we should remember that everything that leads to good is of God, and whatever leads to evil is from the evil one. He closed his instructive remarks by praying for the blessing of God upon the saints, that they might be enabled to carry out the counsel that had been given them. President Joseph Young said that, though far advanced in years and feeble in body, he could still feel that the theory of truth had been advanced by all the previous speakers, as it had been revealed by the inspiration of the Almighty, but the practical part was left for the saints individually to carry out. He then described the fearful condition of those who had once known the truth, and tasted the good word of God, and had apostatized from the faith, but yet bore the image of God. There were many spirits in our midst, all bearing the image of our Heavenly Father, and many of them knowing not, but being entirely ignorant of the great and glorious purposes of God. We should treat them kindly, for we knew that God designed in his providences concerning them. He then invited the bishops and other authorities to unite with the 70s in the selection of men to take missions, who would be honorable representatives of the kingdom of God. He also urged the establishment of labor institutions, that none need walk our streets, seeking labor and finding none. He also pleaded the cause of the poor. The conference was adjourned till 2:00 p.m. The choir sang the anthem, "The Lord Will Comfort Zion." Benediction by Elder D. H. Wells. Afternoon, October 8, 2 p.m. The choir sang, "Softly Beams the Sacred Dawning of the Great Millennial Morn." Prayer by Elder J.D.T. McAllister. The choir sang, "Hark, listen to the trumpeters, they sound for volunteers." Elder George Q. Cannon read the following interesting reports. President John Taylor's report. At our last April conference, 1878, we read an account furnished by the different stakes, giving a full exhibit of the financial condition of the various stakes of Zion. I had quite a desire to have a statement of these accounts read at this conference, but found upon reflection that it would be altogether impracticable. The bishops in their several wards do not make a settlement with their wards oftener than once a year, namely at the end of each year. It is true that there are some places and parties who make settlements oftener than this, but as those settlements are not general, it would only complicate matters to give a partial view, and would not meet the object designed. I have therefore thought it best to defer this matter until the next April conference, when the general reports from the several stakes will be in, which will thus enable us to make a satisfactory exhibit. I would respectfully request that the bishops and presidents of the various stakes will furnish to me not later than the 1st of next March, and each succeeding year, a full financial report of the several stakes, including schedules of tithing, and also that Bishop Hunter's agents will furnish him a similar statement, so that his clerk and mine may have time to adjust all accounts between the trustee and bishop, that a satisfactory financial report may be presented. In the absence of a financial report, I am very happy to be able to state that during the last year no person has presented at the trustee and trust's office any draft, bill, or acceptance that has not been met on the day as promptly as any business house or banking institution, and I see no reason why we shall not be able to do so in the future. Reports from Arizona and other missions in the South are quite encouraging, although the settlements on the Little Colorado River have met with severe losses in their crops, arising from a very heavy flood. Brother Erastus Snow, John W. Young, L. John Nuttall, and a company of prominent elders are now on a visit to those far-off settlements with a view to instruct, comfort, organize, and regulate the affairs of the Church. The settlements generally there are operating in the United Order, having started out with the intention and under those instructions. Our missionary operations in the southern states are being prosecuted with earnestness and zeal. Baptisms have been gratifyingly frequent, and quite a call is being made for missionary help. In the northern and northwestern states also the labors of our brethren have not been without fruit, and it is with much pleasure and gratification that we notice an increase of the missionary spirit in the hearts of our brethren of the 70s, the elders and others upon whose shoulder lies the responsibilities of preaching the gospel to the world, which awakening we trust and anticipate will grow and develop until every man called to minister for God shall realize the weight and responsibility of his office and calling. Since our last conference, it has been deemed desirable by the Council of the Apostles to release Elder Joseph F. Smith from the presidency of the Church in Europe, so that he may be the better enabled to give his entire energies to the numerous and responsible duties devolving upon him at home. We have appointed Elder William Budge of the Bear Lake Stake of Zion to succeed him in that important position. From the reports of Elders Smith and Budge, we learned that the elders in Europe have, during the past season, labored with much assiduity, faithfulness, and zeal. In northern Europe, the church was never so large as it is today, notwithstanding the great number of saints who are constantly gathering to the body of the church therefrom. In Sweden, the progress made by the work of the Lord is especially gratifying. Within the last few months, the Book of Mormon has been translated by Elder A. W. Carlson into the language of that nation, and a periodical representing the faith and doctrines of the Church of Jesus Christ is now being published there regularly. These aids to the great work of the last days in that land will, we trust, cause it to advance with greater speed and to the accomplishment of still more abundant good. In Great Britain, though baptisms are not as frequent as in former years, the labors of the brethren are not without encouraging success, especially when we consider the almost universal indifference that is at the present time manifested by the people of that country to all religious matters and themes. In Germany, the way is gradually opening for the preaching of the gospel, and we yet look for a glorious and abundant harvest of souls from among that people to add to the strength of Messiah's growing kingdom. In Switzerland also, the elders are patiently and untiringly warning the people of the day of God's controversy with the nations, and the same may be truthfully said of the labors in the Lord's vineyard in Australia, the Sandwich Islands, and wherever else they may be found ministering. It is gratifying to learn that the temples in Logan and Manti, as well as Salt Lake City, are progressing favorably, and that the Sunday and district schools, as well as the Brigham Young Academy of Provo and our university, are in healthy and prosperous condition. The Relief Societies are progressing with a laudable zeal, and our young men's and young women's mutual improvement societies are performing a good labor in the culture, advancement, education, and general improvement of our youth. We are striving to adjust matters relative to our cooperative institutions and to place them on a basis more in consonance with the revelations given to us on that subject. Zion's Cooperative Mercantile Institution has been established as a stepping stone to the introduction of the United Order, and it is proper that in all of our moves of a temporal nature we should have this great object in view. That institution is emphatically called Zion's Cooperative Mercantile Institution, and ought to operate, as its name indicates, in the interests of Zion, and all the various stakes, being what are termed stakes of Zion, ought to do their business through that institution, and sustain it in all their mercantile operations. On the other hand, the institution should act in behalf of, and in the interests of all the people in the several stakes, and while it is being sustained and helped by all, ought to shield, protect, and help all, that a mutual reciprocity of feeling and action may exist as between the people and that institution. Already a committee has been organized for the purpose of introducing measures to promote the interests of that institution, as well as the general interests of the people throughout the territory. It is contemplated to have a permanent committee, but not having time during this conference to consummate this work, we shall be under the necessity of leaving it in the hands of the 12, the presidents of stakes, and the presiding bishopric to organize such committee, and perhaps county committees also, and for which we desire to have your vote and sanction. There are certain reports presented by subcommittees who have been investigating several matters associated with the mercantile and other interests of this community which we will now present. Report of Subcommittee on Dry Goods, Notions, Boots, and Shoes, Salt Lake City, October 3, 1878. To the Chairman and members of the Investigating Committee. Gentlemen, your subcommittees on dry goods, notions, boots, and shoes, having given the subject referred to us due consideration, beg leave to submit the annexed as our report. First, we consider the best means to unite the people in support of cooperation is for cooperation to deal so fairly that it will be to the advantage of the people to support it. Second, we believe the ZCMI is purchasing generally to the best possible advantage under the circumstances. Third, we are satisfied that goods can be furnished by ZCMI to the branch stores and retail dealers on such terms as it will be to their interest to purchase of ZCMI. Fourth, we would suggest that our manufacturers of woolen goods consider the propriety of classifying the products of their several factories, as we believe goods can be produced cheaper when a specialty is made of some particular line than in the attempt to manufacture all classes in the same factory, and that they and all manufacturers of the home productions bring their business to a cash basis, that their goods may be handled to the best advantage, and that the parent co-op and all other merchants instruct their managers and salesmen to urge the sale of all classes of home products upon the attention of the people. Fifth, we are pleased to learn that ZCMI has purchased, during the last 12 months, over $125,000 worth of homemade articles, and that they are disposed to encourage the sale of all home products as far as practicable. H. S. Eldridge, F. M. Lyman, S. R. Parkinson, S. H. Higginbottom, J. P. Fries, R. S. Watson. Report of Subcommittee on Groceries, Hardware, etc. Salt Lake City, Utah, October 5, 1878. H. S. Eldridge, Esquire, Chairman of the Investigating Committee, City. Dear Brother, your Subcommittee on Hardware, Groceries, etc., having given these special departments of merchandise careful investigation, and in accordance with the instructions from the General Counsel, beg to report as follows. We are of the opinion that to secure for cooperation the united support of the people, it is essential that the several cooperative enterprises in the territory have their confidence, which can be obtained by fair, just, and honorable dealing, and offering advantages to patrons in prices and qualities of goods. As regards the importation of merchandise, we believe that it has been done by Zion's Cooperative Mercantile Institution to the best possible advantage under existing circumstances. Today, however, the institution is in a position to purchase its goods in the markets of the East and West at closer figures than heretofore, and we are satisfied that local cooperative stores and retail dealers can be furnished with these goods at figures and upon terms that will be to their advantage. All classes of home products should be persistently brought to the notice of the people, and to this end we would recommend that managers and salesmen of cooperative institutions urge upon the people the purchase of a home-produced article in preference to an imported one. ZCMI has done much to foster home products and is desirous to continue to do the same. During the past year, we learned that no less than $125,000 worth of homemade articles were purchased by the parent institution and sold to its customers. Respectfully, William Jennings, Chairman, Farrah Moores Little, D. H. Peary, John Clark, Thomas G. Weber, Henry Eyring. Report Subcommittee on Produce, Salt Lake City, Utah, October 4, 1878. Mr. Chairman and Gentlemen of the Committee of Inquiry, your Committee on Produce beg respectfully to submit as their report, first, that the produce trade of our territory is an important one, approximating in value to $1 million per annum, and should, in the opinion of your committee, be handled and marketed as far as possible by Zion's Cooperative Mercantile Institution in the best interest of the producer. Second, it is the opinion of your committee that this branch of trade heretofore has been too extensively managed by middlemen, having no common interest in the prosperity of the people. These parties have frequently secured the saleable produce of our territory at rates which, too often seem to have no relation whatever to the prices secured by them from actual consumers. This, in the opinion of your committee, is all wrong, in that it is a positive injury to our farmers, who, as a class, are not supported to be fully familiar with the tricks of the trade, often practiced upon them by these middlemen. Nor can they reasonably be expected individually to become familiar with prices ruling at commercial centers. It therefore becomes the duty, and it should be the pleasure of ZCMI in receiving the patronage of our home producers to look well to the interest of the latter in this regard, securing for them the lowest rates for transportation where produce is shipped out of the territory, and the highest ruling prices for the same at points of destination. Third, when ZCMI exchanges goods for produce, they should, in the opinion of your committee, make a reasonable profit on the former, and not seek to make gains of the latter. A uniform policy of this kind strictly adhered to would, without doubt, speedily render the business of these middlemen in this line very undesirable. Fourth, we believe that in all these matters Zion's Cooperative Mercantile Institution should, as heretofore, take the lead, fully demonstrating that her interests are fully identified with the interests of the people of our territory, that her efforts are for and not against them, and in this connection she should avoid as far as possible the importation and sale of foreign produce, giving always our home-produced articles the preference. Fifth, in order to secure the best results as to the quality of and prices for the produce of our territory, we would respectfully suggest and earnestly recommend the organization and permanent establishment of a local board of trade in each stake throughout the territory to do business in harmony and with the aid of ZCMI. Sixth, the best possible means with which to unite our people on cooperation in reference to the produce trade of the territory is, in the opinion of your committee, to adopt and practice these suggestions, and for Zion's Cooperative Mercantile Institution in all her commercial relations to protect her customers, and particularly our home producers, as she, under like circumstances, would be like to be protected. Very respectfully, etc., M. Thatcher, R. S. Watson, William W. Burton, George Teasdale. Report on the Subcommittee on Wool, Hides, Pelts, etc., Salt Lake City, October 2, 1878. To the committee appointed to consider the manufacturing and mercantile interests of this territory. Brethren, your subcommittee on wool, hides, pelts, etc., met pursuant to adjournment at the council house, and after mature deliberation we beg leave to report that, in our opinion, in order to accomplish the desired object and obtain a unity of action among the people, the presidency of the several stakes should be called upon to make a strong and determined effort to unite the people in this matter, and we would respectfully suggest that full instructions be issued by the proper authorities to said presidents, setting forth the object to be accomplished, and asking them to use their best efforts to protect the home manufacturing and export interests of the territory. And your committee would further suggest that their attention be especially called to the wool and hide products of the territory, as they are the foundation of our largest home manufactures. We think these articles should be handled within ourselves. We are well aware that there is a large surplus of wool and hides over and above what is required for our home use, and if these products are handled within ourselves, the kind and quality best adapted can be selected for our home consumption, and the surplus sold to our own agents or shipped by them on commission as may best suit the producer. Your committee firmly believe that it is for the best interest of the people to adopt this course, and in doing this, our home industries will be fostered, patronized, sustained, fully carried out, the old adage of the greatest good to the greatest number. A. O. Smoot, Farrah Moore's Little, H. B. Clausen, Anson Call, William R. Smith. Report Subcommittee on Wagons and Machinery, Salt Lake City, October 7, 1878. To the Committee on Cooperation, Home Manufacturers and Industry. Brethren, the Committee on Wagons and Machinery met pursuant to appointment, and beg leave to report that we have examined into the feasibility of furnishing wagons and agricultural machinery at a small percentage above cost, and we are satisfied it can be done, and that the people will be greatly benefited thereby. In order to thoroughly carry out this desirable object, a determined and persistent line of action should be adopted throughout the territory, having in view the full and unqualified support of this measure by the masses of the people. Your committee would suggest that a line of, say, 3 different makes of farm and freight wagons, also a line of spring wagons and buggies, varying in quality and price to suit the trade, be selected to meet our present wants. In regard to mowers, reapers, threshers, and other agricultural machinery and implements, we are satisfied that out of the large variety in the market, one or more of the several kinds can be selected and obtained on such terms as will be entirely satisfactory. There is a great variety of articles in this line that must necessarily be kept for the accommodation of the people, which should be sold on such terms that it will be to the interest of our people to patronize home institutions, instead of foreign firms or agencies, thereby sustaining the principles that promote this important move. Angus M. Cannon, William R. Smith, Bernard White, H. B. Clausen. He said that it had been the intention to present at this conference the names of those who should constitute a Board of Trade, but not having an opportunity on account of a press of other business to definitely select that board, it deemed wisdom to obtain the sanction of this conference in the following motion, which was unanimously sustained by uplifted hands: that the committees on Zion's Cooperative Institution, with the 12 apostles and council, presidents of stakes and their counselors, the presiding bishop and his counselors, and the directors and secretary of ZCMI, are requested to meet at the council house tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock to talk over and adjust matters relative to our temporal interests. President John Taylor reviewed the various subjects that the previous speakers had dwelt upon. He said that the principle of revelation upon which the work of God was founded was not recognized by any people on the face of the earth except the Latter-day Saints. No knowledge of God and spiritual things could be obtained except it was revealed from the heavens, and the world was in ignorance of these things, for they had repudiated the source from which all wisdom came, not only of spiritual but also of temporal things. He severely commented on some things that appeared as advertisements in the columns of our own newspapers, which were derogatory to the universal interests of the community. The actions of men ought not to prevent us from recognizing and acting upon correct principles, and if mistakes and blunders had been made in trying to establish the united order, that it should not prevent us from carrying out the revelations of God, to be united together in our temporal and spiritual affairs, for unless we were one, we were not the Lord's. We had been baptized into the united order, and in the name of Israel's God we would be united, and if anyone should attempt to stand in the way, God would find him out. All who felt to endorse and carry out the principles of union as dictated by the presidency and the 12 would say Amen. A hearty and universal response was given. He then explained the duties of the presidency of the bishopric. All the various quorums and authorities of the church were under the direction and dictation of the presidency and the 12 apostles, and anyone attempting to repudiate or act independently of those authorities would not be sanctioned of God. While it was the duty of the bishops to act in temporal things, the presidency of the high priesthood acted in concert with them. Hence Bishop Edward Hunter had been connected with them in their councils, and he was pleased to have him there. It was not the intention of the presiding council to interfere with the legitimate calling of those acting in the lesser priesthood, but it was expected that every man would do his duty in whatever sphere he operated in. He then made some valuable explanations in relation to the situation and future intentions of the ZCMI and the necessity of establishing a Board of Trade, that every interest of the entire community might be fairly and honorably represented. After some further remarks, he blessed the congregation. All temporal concerns need the attention of the saints. We should prepare for the evils coming upon the earth. Cooperation and the united order. Functions of the two priesthoods. Home manufactures. Discourse by President John Taylor, delivered at the semi-annual conference held in the Tabernacle, Salt Lake City, April 9, 1879. Reported by George F. Gibbs. It has been very properly remarked that we are becoming a great people, and there are a great many interests of a temporal as well as a spiritual nature that must necessarily be attended to. In fact, it has been so contemplated from the beginning. We talk sometimes of earthly things, at other times we speak of heavenly things. Sometimes we speak of things pertaining to time, and at other times of things pertaining to eternity. We have to do with both, or we could not have been here. And being here, it is proper we should come to a right understanding in regard to the position we occupy, and especially that we should comprehend our duties relating to our temporal affairs, and by acting truthfully, honorably, and conscientiously avoid so much annoyance, trouble, litigation, and difficulty that so frequently exists in relation to the gospel of the Son of God. It gives us information pertaining to our existence and to our general relationship to God and to each other, pointing out our various duties and responsibilities. Associated with its priesthood, which among other things is to promulgate the will of God to the ends of the earth, it has taught us principles pertaining to our future, both in relation to the living and the dead, relative to the present, past, and future. We talk a great deal about our gospel, about our spiritual affairs. We have our church organized according to certain principles associated therewith. We have a priesthood organization embracing our stake organization. We have organizations pertaining to spiritual things, if you may so call them, and also for temporal things. For we have to do both with time and with eternity, both with earthly and with heavenly things, and consequently it is necessary we should be interested in all. When we reflect upon our position, there is something peculiar associated with it. At first, the elders of this church were told to go forth and preach the gospel to every creature. Then they were instructed to gather together those who believed, according to the Scriptures. I will take you one of a city, and two of a family, and I will bring you to Zion. And I will give you pastors according to mine heart, which shall feed you with knowledge and understanding. We are gathered together, but being together, there is something more than spirituality associated with our existence. We brought our bodies with us when we came, and we necessarily have to eat and drink, and to have houses to live in, etc. In fact, we require the common necessaries of life just as much as any other people. And then, if we have children, as Bishop Hunter says, there is none of them born with shoes and stockings. But these things have to be provided. Furthermore, being gathered together, we necessarily form a body politic, if you please, and we cannot help ourselves if we would. But we do not want to. We frame laws according to the usage of the nation we are associated with. For being here and finding ourselves in the territory of the United States, we necessarily have had to organize a government, which has assumed a territorial form, and that means a legislature which, with its enactments and all the various adjuncts of a government. Laws have to be made, officers must be created to execute those laws, and we necessarily become an integral part of these United States, and have to perform all the political functions associated therewith. These things naturally flow unto us, and they will continue to grow and increase. If it be true what the Scriptures say, and if it be true what many of our brethren have preached to you since the assembling of this conference, then it becomes a matter for us to reflect upon that we understand our true position, how we can best sustain ourselves religiously, socially, politically, and financially, and among other lessons, learn to produce at home those articles we stand in need of. We have been brought up in the world and have imbibed many ideas in common with mankind generally, pertaining to commerce, trade, and manufactures, but we need the inspiration of the Almighty in all of the affairs of life, for we profess emphatically to be the people of God, and it is with us in our religion, so it ought to be with our politics, our trade, and manufactures. They ought in all things to be subservient to one grand principle, and that is the acknowledgment of God and His laws. Permit me here to state that before the revelations of God to man in these last days, there were no people that had correct knowledge of God. that we have any knowledge of anywhere upon the earth. All were without prophecy, without revelation, without a knowledge of the doctrine or ordinances of the gospel, and to whom are we indebted for a knowledge of these things? Certainly not to ourselves, and as assuredly not to any earthly body or system in existence. We are indebted alone to God for a knowledge of these things, through his revelations made first by himself and by his well-beloved Son, and then by the ministering of holy angels, by the communication from the heavens to the earth. We are indebted to him for all the light and intelligence we possess in relation to these things. What do we know about the first principles of the gospel? Nothing. What did we know about the gathering, or about Zion, or about the ordinances of the gospel, or about the holy priesthood? Nothing at all. Nor did we know anything about the building of temples, or about the mode of administering in them, until directed by the Almighty. It was he who revealed the necessity of the construction of those sacred edifices, and the mode of administering therein. What does the outside world know about these things? Nothing. And if they had our temples, they could not administer therein. We are indebted to God alone for the light and intelligence we have received. Again, in regard to political matters, where is there a nation today under the face of the whole heavens that is under the guidance and direction of the Lord in the management of their public affairs? You cannot find one. It is true that the founders of this nation, as a preliminary step for the introduction of more correct principles, and that law and that liberty and the rights of man might be recognized, and that all men might be equal before the law of the land, had that great palladium of liberty, the Constitution of the United States, framed. This was the entering wedge for the introduction of a new era, and in it were introduced principles for the birth, the organization of a new world. The prophet Joseph Smith said that the Constitution of the United States was given by the inspiration of God. But good, virtuous, and holy principles may be perverted by corrupt and wicked men. The Lord was opposed by Satan. Jesus had his Judas, and this nation abounds with traitors who ignore that sacred palladium of liberty and seek to trample it underfoot. Joseph Smith said they would do so, and that when deserted by all, the elders of Israel would rally around its shattered fragments and save and preserve it inviolate. But even this, good as it was not a perfect instrument. It was one of those stepping stones to a future development and the progress of a man to the intelligence and light, the power and union that God alone can impart to the human family. And while we acknowledge as citizens of the United States the laws and institutions thereof, which by the way are very easily complied with, we have a higher law, more noble principles, ideas that are more elevated and expansive, principles that reach to the whole human family and which he will continue to reveal to us. Does that prevent us from obeying the laws of the land? Certainly not. But then, is that a perfect system? I do not think that many of you will say it is, nor do I think that the people of the United States in any political party will tell you that it is. I do not wish to cast any reflections or refer to any events that have taken place. I am merely speaking on religious principles, and principles, too, in which we as Latter-day Saints are interested. We are united, then, as a body politic, and as an integral part of this government, and it becomes our duty to submit to the laws and institutions of that government, to all that are constitutional, framed, and based upon correct principles, and not in violation of what the fathers of this country instituted. But have we any higher aim than this? We have. Do any object? If so, why should they? Do we in any wise interfere with any man's rights, government, or make war upon any other parties? No, but we are interested in the preservation of justice, equality, and the rights of man in the development of peace, the further establishment of correct, more elevated, refined, and exalted principles, in placing ourselves in a position more in accordance with things as they exist in the heavens, for the welfare and happiness of the human family. God has given unto us certain principles which we feel bound to observe. Is there anything wrong in this? I think not. We have all kinds of institutions here in the United States and in other nations, such as Oddfellows, Freemasons, and others, and they have a right to their ideas and manner of doing things as long as they observe the laws, and so have we, and have a right to be protected also in those rights. But to say we must stand still is a thing not connected with our creed. If others do not desire to accompany or keep pace with us, we must still go on under the guidance of the Lord. As was said of ancient Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is our King, the Lord is our Judge, and he shall rule over us. So we say. We need information and revelation in regard to our religious matters. We need information, intelligence, and revelation in regard to our political, social, and all temporal matters. If we humble ourselves and purify ourselves and magnify our callings as the elders of Israel, according to the Scriptures, we will yet teach the princes of this world wisdom, and their kings knowledge and understanding. For these things that are spoken of will assuredly come to pass when out of Zion shall go forth the law and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. The purposes of God shall yet be fulfilled in relation to these matters. God's work will most assuredly progress until the kingdoms of this world shall become the kingdoms of our God and of his Christ, and he will rule forever and ever. Not in war, not in confusion and strife and discussions, not in evil and corruption, but in the interests of humanity, according to the laws of life and in accordance with the intelligence that dwells in the bosoms of the gods, and in the interests of a fallen world. Now we come to other matters pertaining to our mercantile institutions. I might talk further about our social relations, etc. However, these are subjects we hear a good deal about. We are pretty well informed in relation to them. The information we have pertaining to our association with our wives, and wives with their husbands, has been revealed to us by God, and we are striving to carry out those eternal principles which will exalt us, our progenitors, and our posterity in the celestial kingdom, where we can enjoy the presence of God and that of the celestial hosts who have gone before. We come again to our temporal interests. Has the world been our exemplar with regard to any of these things that I have mentioned? No, the Lord has been our teacher. He has been our guide and director. Without him, we could have accomplished nothing, for we knew no more naturally than anybody else did. In relation to temporal things, are we capable as Latter-day Saints of fulfilling our destiny on the earth, and procuring a full temporal salvation, and sustaining ourselves on temporal principles without the interposition of the Almighty? I tell you, no, we are not, no more than we are in regard to any other things. We read the Scriptures of a time that is coming when there will be a howling among the merchants in Babylon, for men will not be found to buy their merchandise. This is in accordance with the prediction of John the Revelator, and the gold and the silver and the fine linen, etc. And in Babylon will be of no avail. But before that time comes, we as a people must prepare for those events, that we may be able to live and sustain ourselves, when in the midst of convulsions that by and by will overtake the nations of the earth, and among others this nation. The time that is spoken of is not far distant. He that will not take up his sword against his neighbor must needs flee to Zion for safety, and Zion herself must flee to the God of Israel, and hide herself in the shadows of his wing, seeking for his guidance and direction to lead her in the right path, both as regards spiritual and temporal affairs, things social and things political, and everything pertaining to human existence. We are not prepared as a people today for the accomplishment of this object. We need the interposition and guidance of the Almighty. It is just as necessary that we be under his guidance in relation to these matters as it is in regard to any other matters. Who made the earth? The same being that made the heavens. Who made our bodies? The same being that made our souls. And it takes body and the spirit to make the soul of man. We need not arrogate to ourselves any particular intelligence, whether of mercantile, manufacturing, chemical, or scientific nature. For if there is anything good or intelligent, it is the Lord who has imparted it, whether man acknowledge it or not. We want to acknowledge the Lord in all things, temporal as well as spiritual. I wish now more directly to touch upon some other principles associated therewith. Some of us seem to be very much confused in our minds as to how we shall operate in regard to temporal affairs. We have brought with us the feelings, views, and ideas of the people from whence we came. We are conflicting, and which tend to disintegration and division, and lead to covetousness and fraud, which ought not to have an existence among the saints of God. We have advertisements published in our newspapers by the Latter-day Saints too, things that are infamous, that are untrue, that are a shame and a disgrace among honorable people, and standing as a living lie. The community at large should not countenance such things as we see in our daily papers, to attract the attention of the unwary and bring what they call grists to their mill, in the interest of the individual. We as a people are not called together to act in individual interests. We are called together as saints of God to operate in the interests of the Zion of God, for the welfare of Israel, and not let ourselves float along with the balance and all swim together, or all sink together. We ought to be governed by principles of union, fellowship, and right feeling, carrying out honorable and upright principles, that should be acknowledged before God, the holy angels, and all honorable men. Now, after speaking so much upon general principles, let me touch upon some things referred to here about these reports, etc. We have long talked about the United Order and about cooperation, and we have started in a good deal like some of our little boys when they begin to run. We have made many great stumbles in this matter. Little Willie and Annie often think they can manage things better than Daddy and Mammy, and we, like them, have assumed to ourselves strength, and the first thing we know are pulling this way, that way, and the other. Then, have the institutions been exactly right? No, all kinds of foolishness and all kinds of blunderings have occurred in their administration, but shall we quit? I think not. That is just what the devil would like, just what many of our merchants want, and it would be the very thing that would suit the world, and the devil would laugh at us. What we want to do is to purge out the things that are wrong and correct them, and place them upon a correct basis, and then adhere to them as we would any other part of our religion. In the church, if a man lies or swears or commits adultery or does anything wrong, we deal with him according to the laws of the church. But because men do wrong, we do not abandon our principles, nor leave the church. But we turn such individuals out that will not be righted, and we aim to adjust all things that place them on a proper basis. Why not do the same in temporal things? We have, for instance, Zion's Cooperative Mercantile Institution. It is called the parent institution, and it ought to be the parent of all these institutions and act as a father and a protector and benefactor, doing all it can to promote the welfare and prosperity of the people. And then the people, on the other hand, ought to protect it and sustain it by doing their business through that institution and act prudently, wisely, orderly, and unitedly in regard to these matters, that we may be one. For our revelations tell us, if we are not one, we are not the Lord's. And if we are not the Lord's, whose are we? We talk sometimes about the United Order. I do not propose to read to you on this occasion from any of the revelations bearing on this subject, but will quote to you in substance from one of them. The Lord has told us that those who would not comply with the requirements connected with this order should have their names erased from the book of the law of God, and their genealogies must not be found on any church records or history. Their names shall not be found, nor the names of their fathers, nor the names of their children, written in the book of the law of God. These words are to us, Latter-day Saints. They are true and are binding upon us. Another thing, what did we do when President Young was among us, urging these things upon us? Did we not enter into covenant by rebaptism to be subject to the priesthood in temporal as well as spiritual things, when we took upon ourselves the obligations of the United Order? Let me ask you, what do we mean by doing this? Is it a mere form, a farce, or do we intend to carry out the covenants we made? I tell you in the name of Israel's God that they will be carried out, and no man can plow around these things, for God has decreed that they should be accomplished, and any man who sets himself in opposition to these principles, which God has established, he will root him out. But the principle itself will not be rooted out, for God will see that it is accomplished, and in the name of Israel's God we will help him to do it, and all who feel to do it say Amen. The large congregation responded with a loud Amen. We have started cooperative institutions, and I will touch on a principle now, showing that they ought to be governed. God has ordained two priesthoods upon the earth, the Melchizedek and the Aaronic. The Melchizedek presides more especially over the spiritual affairs of the church, and has done in all ages when it has existed upon the earth. You will find this provided for in the Doctrine and Covenants. You can hunt it up at your leisure. I do not wish to stop to make the quotation now. The Aaronic priesthood is presided over by the presiding bishop. If we had a literal descendant of Aaron, he would have the right to preside over the bishopric, and to operate and manage and direct these things without the aid of counselors. In the absence of such men, the Lord has directed us to take men from the high priesthood and set them apart to be bishops, to administer in temporal things. This Aaronic priesthood is an appendage to the Melchizedek priesthood, and its province is to administer in temporal affairs. One reason why we want men of this class to administer in temporal things is because there is a special provision made for it. Nevertheless, a high priest that is after the order of Melchizedek may be set apart to administer in temporal things, having a knowledge of them by the Spirit of truth. And before a man attempts to administer in Zion in temporal things, he ought to obtain a knowledge of that Spirit of truth to administer according to the intelligence which the Spirit of truth imparts. Thus we have the Aaronic priesthood in its place, the Melchizedek priesthood in its place, and in all various functions it is necessary to enter into all the various organizations. It is on one or two particular points that I wish to speak now. In the first place, the Lord requires certain things to be done to meet his approbation, and everything has to be done under the direction of the presidency of the 12, both temporal things and spiritual things. The bishops and the presidents of stakes and all the officers of the Church of God are subject to this authority, and they cannot get around it. And when any officer of this church, who by virtue of his calling does things without counseling with the proper authorities of the church, he takes upon himself things that he has no right to do, and such a course cannot be acceptable before God and the priesthood. Now then we come to the bishopric. Ought the bishops to be consulted in regard to temporal things? Yes, they ought. And as an example, let me tell you that for the last year Bishop Hunter has associated with the Council of the 12 whenever they have met to consider temporal matters. And I may say we have been pleased to have his company, because it was his place to understand the position of temporal things, that we may know his feelings, and counsel with him and he with us, that everything may be done according to the order and laws of God, that there may be perfect unanimity. With this view he was placed as one of the counselors to the trustee in trust, because the trustee in trust thought it belonged to him to hold that position, and thinks so today. But then does he preside over the Melchizedek priesthood? No, he does not. Who and what is he? A high priest ordained and set apart to the bishopric. By whom? The presidency. Does he control the presidency? No, he is set apart by them. As bishop, he is an appendage to the higher priesthood, and does not control it. No man controls it. I remember a remark made on one occasion by Joseph Smith in speaking with Bishop Partridge, who was then bishop. He was a splendid good man, as Bishop Hunter is, but he got some crooked ideas into his head. He thought he ought to manage some things irrespective of Joseph, which caused Joseph to speak rather sharply to him. Joseph said, "I wish you to understand that I am president of this church, and I am your president, and I preside over you and all of your affairs. Is that correct doctrine?" Yes, it was true then, and it is true today. Well, it is necessary that we should have an understanding of these things, that we may make no mistakes in our administration. I want, then, in all our operations to confer with our bishops, and if this institution of ours is Zion's cooperative, then it should be under the direction of Zion, under the direction of the priesthood, and if it is not Zion's cooperative, then it is a living lie. But do we wish to interfere with them? No, we do not. Do we wish to interrupt them in any of their operations? No, we want to help them. We want to unite them and all the people into one, with God at our head, governed by the holy priesthood. Have they rights? Yes. Do we respect them? Yes. Have the people rights? Yes. Shall the people be respected in their rights? Yes, they shall, all the people and all the stakes, and while we sustain them, they must sustain us, and if they expect to have our support, they must give us theirs. Having said so much, I will tell you that I believe sincerely that the men managing our cooperative institution are doing just as well as they know how, and I will state further that I don't know of any persons in this community who know how better than they do, and I have been now for some time associated with them, and am acquainted with their proceedings. There are other principles beside this. We want to learn to manufacture our own goods, and while on the one hand we use the best talent and financial ability we can get to attend to our mercantile institutions, on the other hand, we need to cherish a spirit to encourage home manufactures of every kind, and we want to get this institution to help us to do it. If we manufacture cloths and boots and shoes or anything else, we want the institution to dispose of our goods. If we need encouragement in regard to the introduction of any manufactures of any kind, we want them to help us, and we have a right to expect this of them as far as it is wise, prudent, and legitimate. I will state that the directors of ZCMI feel interested in the very things that I am talking about, and I say to their credit and for your satisfaction. I do not think there is an institution in the United States in a better condition than it is today, and it is improving all the time, not after any fictitious matter, but on solid, firm, reliable basis. Now, then, I have proposed to these brethren, which they quite coincide with, that when they shall be able to pay a certain amount as dividends on the means invested, after reserving a sufficient amount to preserve the institution intact against any sudden emergency that may arise, which is proper among all wise and intelligent men, that then the profits of the institution outside of this should be appropriated for the development of the home manufactures, the making of machinery, the introduction of self-sustaining principles, and the building up of the territory generally, and they acquiesced in this feeling. And I say it to their honor and credit, and I will tell you again that the Church has got a large interest in that institution. Consequently, we wish to see everything go aright, not on any wild erratic principle, but on a solid, firm, reliable basis that can be carried out, and that will elicit the admiration and confidence of all good and honorable men. Sometimes little difficulties have arisen outside through interested individuals who have resorted to a good deal of trickery, other times perhaps from just causes, and I will say too that complaints have been made that we have not sufficiently sustained our home manufactures. I will say, however, that the institution has stood in a very delicate position. We have been struggling with the financial crisis that has cast a gloom over this nation for the last number of years, since 1873, but we are now getting into a solid, firm position, and when we declared 3% for the 6-month dividend, it was because the institution was able to do so. And when we are able to extend this a little farther, we will be quite willing to do so. Some of the complaints that have been made against the institution we have heard, and we have thought best to have a board, and refer to that board any complaints that might be made from any part of the territory. This board has been temporarily organized, has given us these various reports, which have been read in your hearing, which indicate their views and feelings in regard to these things. We wish a board of that kind to be organized upon a correct basis according to the order of this Church and Kingdom of God, and then, as the people throughout the territory send to purchase their goods from them, let the people that make these purchases be represented, and if there is anything not straight in their operations, let it be made straight. And this is what this committee is for, that the people may be protected as well as the institution. Then stake organizations are recommended, with a representative from each stake at the general or central board, and it will make it much more pleasant for the management of that institution to have a criticism of that kind, and it will also tend to allay many of the foolish things which are frequently put in circulation in different parts of the territory. The object, then, is this board is that the people may be represented, and that Zion's Cooperative may also be properly represented, that it may serve as a balance wheel to adjust and correct any matters of difficulty that may arise. I am happy to say that in many parts of the territory they are introducing the manufacture of leather and boots and shoes and a variety of other articles, and suffice it to say that, according to these reports, the parent institution has sustained the manufacture of these home articles quite liberally, and we want to be in that position that everything we use can be bought here. This, too, the feeling in relation to this matter. And when we get things in a proper fix, we will pull in a long pull and a strong pull and a pull together. We will strive to be one, and if we cannot go so far as to sustain cooperation in regard to these things, how, in the name of common sense, are we ever going into the united order? But we will begin with this, and then cooperate in all the different stakes, not only in your merchandising, but in your manufacturing affairs, and in your producing affairs, and in everything it will be the duty of this General Board of Trade to regulate the interests of the whole community, honestly and faithfully. At least we do it according to the best ability we have, and if there should any mistakes arise, we will try to correct them. If they are on the part of the people, we will talk to them about it. If on the part of the institution, we will talk to its management about it, and we will keep working and operating until we succeed in introducing and establishing these things that God has desired, and until Zion shall be a unified people, and all the glory of all the earth. God bless you and lead you in the path of life. In the name of Jesus, amen. Elder George Q. Cannon then presented the following names of missionaries who were unanimously sustained. For the Hawaiian Islands, Franklin W. Young of Oak Creek, Benjamin Clough, Jr. of Provo, Ashley's Fork, Wasatch County, Utah, Jeremiah Hatch, Sr., Heber City, Alva Hatch, Heber City, H. E. Hadlock and family, Franklin, Idaho, Wisconsin, Ferdinand H. Hinsa, Salt Lake City, Michigan, O. S. Lee of Peoria, Summit County. Elder Nathan T. Porter's name was withdrawn from a mission east on account of other important duties required of him at home. Conference was adjourned by President John Taylor until the 6th of April, 1879, at 10 o'clock a.m. The choir sang Te Deum. Benediction by Elder D. H. Wells. George Goddard, Clerk of Conference.